Let's get into our minds this morning. We're heading to Daniel, and we're going to be thinking about Daniel chapter 2 in just a few moments. But let's just remind ourselves where we were, because we started this series in the book of Daniel a couple of weeks ago. We've had a family service since, so let's just remind ourselves. We went into the book of Daniel and sought to establish some context into the predicament that God's people faced, now in exile at the hands of the besieging Babylonians. Many of them had been carried off into exile. And we were reminded in the context of all the events that unfolded as King Nebuchadnezzar took the best and the brightest off into this far-off place, we are reminded that despite all the evidence pointing to this powerful king being in control, that actually Daniel chapter 1 wanted to remind us that it is God who remained sovereign over and above all these events. It was God who was sovereign over the judgment that befell the wayward people, and it is God who is sovereign over the work that he would bring about to draw them back to himself, just as he promised through the prophet Jeremiah. And those wonderful words that are often so familiar find their appropriate context in this series when we say of Jeremiah 29 and verse 11, "For I know the plans I have for you." What a word of comfort that must have been to an unsettled people carried off to a far-off place to hear the Lord declare through his prophet, "I know the plans I have for you. Not finished with you. You're not done yet. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile." And so with this in mind, we went further than simply saying, God is sovereign, this is so true, but we went further to seek to understand what his sovereignty means for us. And the thing that we said recurringly, the thing that I said recurringly 2 weeks ago is this, that God has a loving plan for his people at all times. Even the hard times, the moments when it's difficult to see or to know what that is because his ways are above our own, but God has a loving plan for his people at all times. Even in exile. Whilst the people have left the land, God has not left his people. He is still with them. And how wonderfully this is seen in the life of Daniel, who despite being carried off thousands of miles away, despite being immersed into Babylonian culture and learning, despite being renamed in an attempt to remake him into the image of Babylon, Daniel remembered who he was and the one in whose image he had been made, and how God was with him. And so Daniel, trusting in a God who has a loving plan for his people at all times, took a stand. Remember in Daniel chapter 1 how he took a stand. He refused to compromise in a compromised culture, but alongside his 3 friends, sought to live distinctive lives. Not for the sake of being distinctive, but for the sake of following God and trusting in his ways. And as Daniel leant upon the Lord, Daniel and his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael and Azariah, they were strengthened by God. He gave them wisdom, he gave them understanding, he showed them grace and favour while they lived in exile. This morning we come to the events of Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, where we're presented with this incredible moment that will do 2 things, at least 2 things. I pray it will speak more to you. And I've not got time this morning, in a sense, to cover every aspect of this passage. It's a lengthy chapter. So go away and read it for yourselves. But I hope it will do at least 2 things for us this morning, as it would have done for those living in exile. First of all, we will see that the gods of Babylon are impotent. They are useless, worthless. And that human knowledge and power is limited. The gods of Babylon are impotent, and human knowledge and power is limited. And the second thing I hope we will see is that the God who has a loving plan for his people at all times is the God who holds all power and all knowledge. He is, even as King Nebuchadnezzar will announce and confess come the end, the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. To him alone belongs all power and glory, for he alone is the Ancient of Days. I hope we'll see that. I hope we'll see that human power and knowledge is limited, that the gods of this world, whatever that is and whatever it looks like in today's day and age, they are impotent. But there is a God who is all-knowing and all-powerful. And this is important because it means that God is not just a God of good intentions. It's one thing to hear a message proclaimed, well, God has a loving plan for you, but we ask the question, is he powerful enough to bring that plan about? And Daniel chapter 2 will remind us that this sovereign God wields his power according to the riches of his grace and mercy and his promises to his people. So we're in chapter 2, and we'll dip in and out of the passage as we traverse the events that took place in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And it is to the Babylonian ruler that our attentions are first cast. King Nebuchadnezzar has had a dream. Not a profound Martin Luther King moment here. His dream is disturbing to him. He's troubled by it, sufficiently so that he calls all the wise men of Babylon, the sorcerers, the magicians, the enchanters, he calls them all together in order that he would be able to ask of them to interpret his dream. Now, under normal circumstances, the dream would be divulged. The ruler or king or person of power who had had a dream, a vision, would share with these wise men assembled what the dream was, and they would then in turn offer their interpretation. But these are not normal circumstances. Maybe due to the degree of insecurity surrounding the dream that he has received, but Nebuchadnezzar asks that these wise men tell him, the king, both the contents of the dream without him having divulged anything to them. Tell me the contents of my dream, tell me what I dreamed, and tell me what it means. Perhaps King Nebuchadnezzar thought that if they could do the former, then he could trust the latter interpretation, that they would really truly prove that they have this wisdom to discern the events that will take place. Of course, the wise men of Babylon tried to explain to the king that his expectations are unrealistic. And they unsatisfactorily suggest that only the gods can show the king his dream and its meaning. But since these gods do not dwell with people, so it says in Daniel chapter 2, it's beyond them to offer insight. And King Nebuchadnezzar is enraged. And so he orders that all the wise men of Babylon, all the sorcerers, the enchanters, and anyone else who claims to hold wisdom and offer insight into such matters be put to death. And this includes Daniel and his 3 friends, that they be killed. And the opening 11 verses, which I've summarised for you and not read to you, the opening 11 verses in Daniel chapter 2 do 2 things. Firstly, we are reminded by the words of these Babylonians, whether they intend it or not, that ultimately the Babylonian gods are inaccessible and impotent. Indeed, they are no gods at all, but they are images made of wood and stone and metal. They are no gods at all. And secondly, the insecurity and the instability that we see in Nebuchadnezzar in these moments reminds us of the weakness of man and the inability. We have limits to our power, limits to our wisdom. Both the insecurity and the instability of Nebuchadnezzar and the inability of the wise men to answer this request bring to bear the limitation of human knowledge and power. But even as these events now catch up with Daniel and his friends, we're about to see in stark contrast to the Babylonian gods and the people that serve them, the God of Israel suffers no such limitations. The limitations we see in these idols, the limitations we see in people, God suffers no such limitations. And in particular, in the context of what we just read and thought about, the God to whom we turn is neither inaccessible or impotent. So let's pick up our reading in verse 12. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 12. And for the sake of Ben, who may be following, I'm in the NIV that I'm reading from here. Oh, it's not working? Of course it's not. No, apologies, Ben. I did know that. Yes, we have technical gremlins. So verse 12, you have to follow in your own Bible today or just listen in to my Tones which I hope will not be too dulcet for you. Verse 12. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went in to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from God, the God of heaven, concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king." Nebuchadnezzar sends Arioch, captain of the king's guard, to kill the wise men, including, as we've already said, Daniel and his 3 friends. And yet, faced with such dire circumstances, to see those approach, probably with swords drawn, ready to execute the king's commands in this moment, Daniel demonstrates his trust in God by not panicking in this moment. He remains composed, and he speaks with prudence and discretion, first of all with Arioch and then with the king himself. He seeks to better understand why the king has issued such an urgent decree as this to see these people put to death. And when Daniel finds out, when he's given the reason, Daniel does this most incredible thing. He asks for an appointment with the enraged king. He asks for an opportunity to come before the king and to offer an interpretation. He's not yet come before the Lord. He's not yet rejoined his friends and urged them to petition the merciful God and ask that he would reveal the dream. But as an act of faith, trusting that God will not abandon his people in this moment, he comes to the king and says, "Give me time and give me an opportunity." He trusts in God in these moments. And with the appointment made, Daniel seeks out his friends, and he urges them now to petition a merciful God for a revelation of the dream. And in seeking, they found. Remember those words from Jeremiah? And how the Lord said, "If you seek me, you will find me." And in seeking the Lord in these moments, they found him, and they found him truly to be merciful, just as Jeremiah the prophet promised as he delivered the word of the Lord. And then with a real economy of words, in a lengthy passage, we simply learn that a vision came to Daniel and everything was unveiled before him. He knows, he has insight, he's been granted wisdom and power that is from above, a divine knowledge and power in these moments. And as we come to this, we realise, and we have for us in black and white before us, this living word that speaks to us, a reminder that our God is neither inaccessible. Gareth has reminded us in the ordinary events how we can turn to him in all circumstances. God graciously and wonderfully, amazingly, astoundingly has made himself available and accessible to us. And Daniel and the 3 friends turn to God, who is accessible to them and who reveals himself as anything but impotent. In hearing the prayers of his people, he answers them powerfully, wonderfully, granting wisdom from on high. And so Daniel turns back to the Lord and does what is necessary in these moments, he praises God. He praises God. As we shared testimony this morning, and I suspect there are many other stories of this week past that we could share. There are things I could tell you from Holiday Club that were ordinary moments that spoke to me profoundly, that encouraged me. But do we take the opportunity and the urgency of everything that is unraveling for Daniel in these moments, and the pace that everything is happening in, and his deep desire to see not only his 3 friends saved, but also, as we're going to see in a moment, the other wise men of Babylon saved? Daniel still takes opportunity to reorientate his focus to the Lord and say, thank you. Praise you, God, for your goodness and mercy towards us. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. And so Daniel is now ready to go before the king. Verse 24. And then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him. You know, this is a wonderful verse that I don't want to rush past as a mere interlinking detail. This isn't where we're in a sense focusing our attention, but do you see the consequence of God being both merciful and mighty? That it's not just a mercy that meets Daniel and his 3 friends, not just these 4 people who are saved, but all the wise men of Babylon. Pagan people, God's mercy touches them in these moments, whether they know it or not. And God is moving not just to rescue his people, but to show his merciful hand to the nations. And this is a message for the nations. This was a message not just for the people of God, but this was a message for the nations. It's no small detail that whilst most of the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, Daniel chapter 2 through to chapter 7 is written in Aramaic. A kind of internationally known language amongst the ancient Near East at the time. This was accessible to other people to be able to hear about the God of all power and wisdom and the revealer of mysteries, how he is both mighty and merciful. And so in a sense, the passages that we are walking through are in a very real way for a Gentile audience. And I can't help, as we read verse 24, be reminded of Frederick William Faber's hymn, there is a wideness in God's mercy, like the wideness of the sea. There's a kindness in his justice, which is more than liberty. And we see the wideness of God's mercy in these moments, as it's not just Daniel and his friends who are saved from this execution order, but also the wise men of Babylon, pagan enchanters, sorcerers though they be. God reaches out and shows mercy to sinners. And how we rejoice in news such as this. And so Daniel comes before the king and is quick to highlight, and I realise I'm moving on at a pace here, and the length of the chapter requires it in these moments, so stay with me if you can. But Daniel comes before the king and is quick to highlight that he stands before the king not because he is wise, but because there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Daniel's saying, not me. I can't give you what you need, but God is the revealer of mysteries. At which point Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar both the contents of his dream and its interpretation. And so we pick up in verse 31. Verse 31 of Daniel chapter 2. And here is the vision, the dream, and here is its interpretation. Your Majesty looked, and therefore there before you stood a large statue. An enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. For iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united, any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. This dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. This is a staggering moment, a truly staggering moment, that not only should God reveal the mystery and meaning of this dream had by the Babylonian king, but that he should also use this moment to further reveal his great plan and promise to establish a lasting kingdom that will have no end. Of course, for God's people, this was a message of grace that filled them with hope and motivated faithfulness, because this word would have reminded them of God's covenant with his people, his covenant with King David. For God's people, this was a message that reminded them God was a covenant-keeping God, even whilst far off in exile. Even whilst facing judgment for their waywardness and their sins, God has not finished with his people. He is a covenant-keeping God. They may be in a foreign land, they may be in exile, they may be facing the judgment of a God who has warned them many times, but God has not forgotten his promises. Indeed, in these moments, the covenant made with David should come to the fore for all who read this account, and we think of the words in 2 Samuel chapter 7 and how God promised to David that there will be one after him in his line who will establish a lasting kingdom. And the dream, now unveiled by God through Daniel, was of a great and magnificent figure. Head of gold, chest and arms of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. A mighty and a magnificent figure, like all the empires that have paraded across the ages in their pomp. But then there is a stone not cut by human hands, and it crashes against the feet of iron and clay, causing them to smash, along with the iron and the bronze and the silver and the gold before it, everything destroyed to such an extent that it becomes like chaff blown away in the summer breeze. No evidence of it remains, it's carried away. But the stone, not cut by human hands, becomes like a mountain that fills the earth. Daniel, with divinely imparted wisdom, explains the dream as a depiction of a rising and falling of empires. at the end of which will come a kingdom established by God, a kingdom that will have no end, an everlasting kingdom, an indestructible dominion. And this kingdom will bring to an end all others and stand forever. And listen to what Daniel says come the end. This dream is certain and its interpretation true. Daniel doesn't wait to see the reaction of the king. The king, in some respects, you think would have every right to be incensed by this interpretation because Daniel has insinuated his empire will come to an end. Of course, that is absolutely true. He is human. He has an end. But Daniel does not wait to see the king's response to this dream. He merely, trusting in God, seeking to honour God even before the Babylonian king, says this dream is certain, its interpretation sure. It has come from the revealer of mysteries. We perhaps don't expect what happens next when Nebuchadnezzar, having heard Daniel clearly and so accurately depict the dream that he had, now give interpretation to it. He falls down and announces before Daniel, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. Such a great sadness that Nebuchadnezzar is ultimately unchanged by these events. But for Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, along with all the Lord's exiled people, for all of whom life looked immensely difficult, but into the place of exile amid a compromised culture, God reveals himself once more as a God in whom they can place their trust. These kingdoms, these powers, these authorities that subjugate you, that oppress you, they will have an end. But my kingdom, says the Lord, it will have no end. He is the true and living God. He is accessible. He is omnipotent. He is all-powerful in that sense. It is this God who has a loving plan for his people in all times. He is the one who is mighty and he is the one who is merciful. Friends, that is such a treasured thing to hold on to know that God is mighty and merciful. And one day he will establish a lasting kingdom. This was the message he delivered to his people. Yes, through the dream of a Babylonian pagan king, yes, but a message the people will have heard, a message that Daniel and the three friends heard, that this kingdom will have an end, but not mine, says the Lord. And how this vision, this dream must have sustained a faithful remnant, and how it must encourage us today. It must encourage us today. Like the Lord's people of Daniel's day, we live in no less a compromised culture. A time and a place where power balances could easily unsteady the soul. We read of the powerful besieging Babylonians, but we ask, what of them now? What of them now? The land itself, the epicenter of this activity, is modern-day Iraq. But the rest of Babylonian culture and the rest of Babylonian wealth, where does that now sit? Well, it can be found in two places, as best we know. Room 55 of the British Museum and another room in a museum in Berlin. We could even ask the same question of the great and mighty Roman Empire. What of it now? Well, it stands only as a few, impressive though they may be, ruins. Ruins which so often are peddled as overpriced tourist attractions for us to go and see. Indeed, we as a family went to Hadrian's Wall this last summer. We saw the Roman forts up there, but they stand as ruins, crumbling edifices of a once mighty empire that has since passed. The book of Daniel cries out to those who are trusting in the Lord. It cries out, do not be frightened by the powers and wisdom of the age in which you live. Don't be fearful of the gods of your day, no longer lumps of wood or metal and stone, but the ideas of secularism or humanism or materialism or popularism, whatever it may be. Do not be afraid of these things. Don't be afraid, because there is another kingdom that will stand forever. And history tells us a story. That the Babylonians ultimately fell to the Persians fell to the Greeks fell to the Romans. And then one day, over 600 years after this dream in Daniel, in a far-flung corner of that Roman Empire, in a remote village to a poor family and into a crude cradle, a baby was born. Who would have conceived such a plan? Jesus, the stone not hewn by human hands, would live out his life announcing that the kingdom had come. And he would die on a cross. He would rise on the third day. He would ascend to the Father with a promise that he will come again to secure this kingdom that will have no end. His is a kingdom that will never be crushed. His name, his words, his teaching, his victory, never to be undone. Though many have tried over the ages. Time and time again there will be the announcement across the ages, God is dead. And yet time and time again his kingdom grows. Do not be afraid of the powers and wisdom of this age. Trust in the God who is merciful and mighty. Trust in the God who is all-knowing and all-powerful. Trust in the God who has a loving plan for his people at all times. Trust in a God who has an eternal plan for his glory and for our good. Trust in him. That's what this passage cries out. Trust in him. And so may our response this morning be like that of Daniel. May we have a heart stirred towards praising God. Daniel had that revelation of the dream and the immediacy of things. His response was to praise God. And so we sing, none above him, none before him, all of time in his hands. For his throne it shall remain and ever stand. All the power, all the glory, I will trust in his name. For my God is the Ancient of Days.